North Atlantic, September 1939. Just after 0400 hours, the merchant ship Athenia, a passenger liner sailing from Liverpool, was struck by a torpedo from U-30. The sinking within hours of Britain's declaration of war immediately amplified a nascent fear within the Admiralty. The U-boat, once a nuisance, now represented an existential threat to the lifeline of the island nation. Naval strategists, still reeling from the Great War's submarine campaigns, understood that the torpedo, a weapon of stealth and sudden destruction, had evolved beyond its previous iterations, capable of inflicting catastrophic damage on even the largest warships, let alone unescorted civilian vessels. The Admiralty's initial assessment of torpedo defense focused heavily on passive measures, increased compartmentalization, thicker belt armor, and anti-torpedo bulges. These were the established doctrines, born of pre-war naval arms races and the slow, deliberate engagements of dreadnoughts. Yet a growing unease permeated the operational planning rooms, particularly among the younger officers and the newly integrated scientific advisors. Dr. Patrick Blackett, a physicist of formidable intellect and a future Nobel laureate, found himself increasingly drawn into these discussions, his keen mind immediately questioning the efficacy of purely defensive structures against an ever-improving offensive weapon. Damage reports from early engagements, meticulously compiled by the Naval Construction Department, painted a grim picture. The torpedo's warhead, often containing 500 pounds of TNT or more, detonated below the waterline, creating a massive shockwave and a rapidly expanding gas bubble that could buckle internal bulkheads, rupture fuel tanks, and disable propulsion systems with frightening efficiency. A single torpedo hit, even on a heavily armored battleship, could reduce its speed by half, making it vulnerable to subsequent attacks or rendering it incapable of maintaining formation. The perceived invulnerability of capital ships, a cornerstone of naval power projection, began to erode with each new report. The Royal Oak, sunk at Scapa Flow by multiple torpedoes from U-47 in October 1939, served as a stark, chilling testament to this vulnerability. Its loss, a battleship at anchor, highlighted not just the audacity of the U-boat crews, but the devastating power of their primary weapon, even against a vessel designed to withstand immense punishment. Traditional naval tactics, which prioritized heavy armor and large-caliber guns, were proving ill-suited to the new reality of submarine warfare. The ponderous turns of a battleship, designed for line-of-battle engagements, offered little evasion against a weapon traveling at 40 knots. The very design philosophy that had dominated naval architecture for decades was now under scrutiny, its foundational assumptions challenged by the unseen underwater hunter. Blackett, observing the operational data, began to articulate a different perspective. He saw not just the physical damage, but the statistical probabilities of engagement. His preliminary analysis, derived from observed U-boat patrol patterns and torpedo attack profiles, suggested that the current defensive paradigm was fundamentally flawed. It assumed a static target, or at best, a target with limited evasive capability. The reality, however, presented a dynamic problem, one that demanded a dynamic solution beyond simply building thicker hulls. His early memos, circulated amongst a small group within the Admiralty's operational research section, subtly questioned the established wisdom, hinting at an entirely new approach to naval defense, one rooted in mathematical prediction rather than brute force. The Admiralty's directive, terse and urgent, arrived at the Statistical Department of University College London. It was early 1941, and the Battle of the Atlantic was a grim, relentless attrition. U-boat wolfpacks, once a scattered nuisance, were now a coordinated, devastating force, sinking merchantmen and warships with alarming regularity. The Naval High Command, facing mounting losses and the ever-present threat to convoys, sought any advantage, no matter how abstract. Their request was disarmingly simple: determine if a battleship, once a torpedo track was sighted, could actually evade. This was not a question for naval architects or gunnery officers. Their domain was the tangible, the calibrated, the observable. This was a problem for pure mathematics, for the cold logic of probability and differential equations. The task fell to a small, unassuming group led by Patrick Blackett, a physicist whose wartime contributions would span radar, operations research, and anti-submarine warfare. He assembled a team, a blend of mathematicians, statisticians, and even a few theoretical physicists, all accustomed to abstract thought, now tasked with the concrete survival of steel behemoths. Their initial approach was to gather data, not from controlled experiments, which were impossible, but from the grim records of naval engagements. Damage reports, convoy logs, U-boat interrogation files, and even the occasional captured German torpedo specification were meticulously compiled. Each fragment of information, from the estimated speed of a G7E torpedo to the turning radius of a King George V class battleship, became a variable in a complex equation of survival. The core of their work involved modeling the interaction between a moving target and a projectile. A torpedo, typically traveling at 30 knots, presented a finite threat envelope. The battleship, a Leviathan displacing over 40,000 tons, possessed a surprising agility for its size, capable of a 30-degree turn in under a minute. The challenge was to quantify the window of opportunity, the precise moment a helm order could translate into a shift in trajectory sufficient to avoid the incoming weapon. They considered various scenarios: a torpedo sighted directly ahead, off the beam, or from the stern quarter. Each angle of approach demanded a different evasive maneuver: a hard turn to port or starboard, a rapid acceleration, or even a sudden deceleration. All had to be analyzed for their effectiveness against a weapon designed for a predictable, straight-line attack. The mathematicians, with their pencils and slide rules, became armchair captains, navigating imaginary seas of probability. Their calculations revealed a critical threshold. If a torpedo was sighted at a range of 1,500 yards or more, and the ship immediately initiated a hard turn, the probability of evasion rose significantly. Below that range, the odds plummeted, the torpedo's speed and the ship's inertia conspiring against survival. The time lag between sighting and execution of the maneuver was also a crucial factor, each second lost diminishing the chances of success. The team developed a series of recommendations, distilled from their complex equations into actionable guidance for naval officers. These were not theoretical musings, but practical instructions: the optimal helm angle, the preferred direction of turn based on torpedo bearing, and the critical importance of immediate, decisive action. The abstract world of mathematics was now directly informing the brutal realities of naval combat, offering a slim but quantifiable hope. Occupied France, August 1943. A U-boat commander, Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Schrödeler, noted in his logbook the perplexing failure of a carefully aimed torpedo spread against a lone Allied freighter. 2 acoustic torpedoes, designed to home on propeller cavitation, had veered wide. This wasn't an isolated incident. Similar reports accumulated in Flensburg, detailing an increasing number of evasive actions by Allied merchantmen, movements too precise, too timely, could be mere chance. The German naval intelligence, B-Dienst, initially dismissed these as anomalies, attributing them to poor torpedo performance or inexperienced crews. Yet the pattern persisted, hinting at a deeper, more troubling development on the Allied side. Across the Atlantic, in the burgeoning war rooms of the U.S. Navy's Operations Research Group, a different kind of battle was being waged, one measured in probabilities and differential equations. Mathematicians, statisticians, and physicists, many plucked from university campuses, were tasked with deciphering the complex dance between predator and prey at sea. Their initial focus had been on optimizing convoy routes and anti-submarine warfare tactics. But as U-boat effectiveness, particularly with the introduction of acoustic homing torpedoes, began to climb in late 1942, the focus shifted to the defensive. How could a ship, often slow and lumbering, escape a weapon designed for speed and precision? The problem was framed as a pursuit-evasion game, a concept then in its nascent stages. A torpedo, once launched, followed a predictable, albeit sometimes erratic path. Its speed was known, its turning radius measurable, its acoustic signature detectable. The ship, however, possessed variables: speed, rudder angle, and the crucial element of human decision. The challenge was to quantify the optimal evasive maneuver, not through intuition, but through rigorous mathematical proof. Early models, often hand-calculated on blackboards, simplified the ocean into a two-dimensional plane, the ship and torpedo as points. Dr. Philip Morse, a physicist from MIT, led many of these early investigations. His team constructed elaborate geometric diagrams, charting theoretical torpedo trajectories and potential ship responses. They considered the torpedo's acquisition range for a target, its maximum deflection angle, and the time delay between detection and impact. The ship's countermaneuver was critical. A sharp turn, if executed at the right moment, could throw off the torpedo's homing system, forcing it to overshoot or lose its acoustic lock. The difficulty lay in determining that precise moment. Damage reports from torpedoed ships, along with detailed accounts from surviving crews, provided crucial empirical data. These reports, often grim, documented impact points, torpedo speeds, and the approximate distance at which the torpedo was first sighted. This information, combined with hydrophone data on torpedo running depths and acoustic signatures, allowed the mathematicians to refine their theoretical models. They began to understand the critical parameters: the torpedo's effective range, its maximum turning rate, and the ship's own maneuverability. The work led to the development of evasive action tables, complex charts that correlated torpedo bearing, estimated range, and ship speed with recommended rudder angles and engine orders. These tables, initially daunting in their complexity, were designed to be interpreted and acted upon by bridge officers under immense pressure. The underlying mathematics involved solving differential equations that described the relative motion of two objects, one pursuing, one evading, with constraints on speed and turning capability. The goal was to maximize the probability of the torpedo missing its target. Production logs from torpedo factories provided critical data on torpedo performance characteristics. The German G7E electric torpedo, for instance, had a speed of 30 knots and a range of 5,000 meters. The acoustic T5 Zaunkönig, a later variant, boasted a speed of 24 knots but possessed a sophisticated active and passive sonar system. These precise figures were fed into the models, allowing for increasingly accurate predictions of engagement outcomes. The mathematicians weren't just guessing, they were calculating the odds. The strategic implication was profound. If ships could reliably evade torpedoes, even a small percentage of the time, it would significantly degrade the effectiveness of the U-boat fleet, shifting the balance of power in the Battle of the Atlantic. It transformed the defensive posture from passive reaction to active, calculated countermaneuver. The quiet hum of calculations in Boston and Washington would soon reverberate across the vast, dangerous expanse of the ocean. The initial findings suggested that a ship, if it detected a torpedo early enough and executed a precise, high-speed turn, could increase its survival rate by as much as 15% against certain torpedo types. This wasn't a guarantee of safety, but a measurable improvement in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a testament to the power of abstract thought applied to the brutal realities of war. Recommendation: disseminate evasive action protocols to all Allied naval and merchant vessels. The initial simulations, run on a combination of mechanical calculators and early electronic tabulators, had already begun to challenge long-held naval doctrines. A destroyer at 30 knots, attempting a full evasive turn upon sighting a torpedo wake, exhibited a surprising vulnerability. The prevailing wisdom dictated a hard turn away from the torpedo's projected path, a maneuver designed to increase the relative speed of the target away from the incoming threat. This, however, often presented a larger, more stable broadside target for the torpedo's magnetic or contact fuse as the ship heeled over. The mathematical models, however, proposed a counterintuitive strategy. Instead of turning away, a sharp turn into the torpedo's path, followed by a rapid reversal of rudder, significantly reduced the time a vulnerable broadside was presented. The geometry of the engagement shifted from a pursuit curve to a complex, oscillating interception. The ship, in essence, became a harder target to track, its aspect changing rapidly, forcing the torpedo's guidance system, if any, to constantly reacquire. Damage reports from the early war, particularly those from the Atlantic convoys, had often dismissed such maneuvers as erratic and dangerous, leading to collisions or presenting an even easier target. Yet, the statistical analysis of 1,200 simulated torpedo attacks against various ship types, ranging from destroyers to battleships, painted a different picture. A straight run, even at maximum speed, yielded a hit probability of 0.65 against a single torpedo launched from 1,500 yards. A hard turn away reduced this only marginally to 0.58. The zigzag maneuver, a series of pre-planned course changes, had been implemented for years to complicate submarine targeting. But these were often too predictable, their periodicity known to experienced U-boat commanders. The new model, however, suggested a dynamic, reactive evasion, a sudden, violent alteration of course after torpedo detection, not before. This was a direct contradiction to the established protocols that emphasized maintaining formation and predictable movements. The key was the rapid change in the target's aspect angle. A ship presenting its bow or stern to an incoming torpedo offered a much smaller cross-section. The models showed that a 90-degree turn into the torpedo, executed within 10 seconds of detection, followed by a correction, could reduce the hit probability to 0.32. This was a profound reduction, nearly halving the risk. The energy required for such a maneuver, particularly for larger vessels, was immense, placing enormous strain on steering gears and hull integrity. Further refinement of the models, incorporating the hydrodynamic forces on a rapidly turning hull, revealed another critical factor: the optimal rudder angle. A full hard-over rudder, while seemingly the most aggressive evasion, often induced excessive drag and a loss of forward speed, making the ship a slower, albeit turning, target. A more measured, but still rapid, rudder application, typically between 20 and 30 degrees, offered the best balance of turning rate and speed retention. The implications for naval tactics were significant. It meant that the individual ship, not just the convoy or fleet, possessed a greater agency in its survival than previously understood. The initiative, once solely with the attacker, could, in a critical window of seconds, be seized by the target. This was not a guarantee of survival, but a quantifiable improvement in odds, a shift from passive acceptance to active, if desperate, resistance. The data suggested that even the massive battleships, with their slower turning circles and immense inertia, could benefit. While their turning radius was significantly larger, the sheer mass of the vessel meant that a torpedo, striking at an oblique angle rather than perpendicular, had a greater chance of glancing off or causing localized damage rather than a catastrophic break. The models predicted a 0.45 hit probability for a battleship executing a specific evasive turn, down from 0.70 for a straight run. The findings were met with a mixture of skepticism and cautious optimism within the Admiralty. The ingrained habits of decades of naval training were not easily overturned. Yet the mathematical rigor of the analysis and the undeniable statistical advantage it presented demanded attention. Recommendation: implement revised evasive maneuver protocols based on probabilistic modeling. The war's operational realities, however, presented a formidable barrier to the elegant solutions emerging from the statistical research group. Naval commanders, steeped in decades of tradition and the hard-won lessons of prior conflicts, viewed the open ocean as a domain governed by intuition, experience, and the unyielding laws of physics, not by abstract probability functions. A battleship, a multi-million-dollar investment of steel and human lives, was not a dice roll. Their training emphasized aggressive maneuvering, maintaining formation, and the swift application of overwhelming firepower. To suggest that a ship should deliberately turn towards an incoming torpedo, or that a seemingly erratic, non-linear course could offer greater protection than a direct high-speed evasion, ran counter to every instinct and every established doctrine. The very notion felt like a surrender of control, an abdication of the captain's responsibility to fight for his vessel. Early attempts to introduce these statistical findings met with polite skepticism, often outright resistance. A 1943 internal Navy memorandum, circulated among fleet admirals, noted the theoretical soundness of the new evasive tactics, but expressed significant reservations regarding practical implementation under combat stress. The chasm between theoretical optimal play and the visceral reality of a U-boat attack at sea was vast. The mathematicians, often academics with little direct naval experience, struggled to bridge this gap. Their language of confidence intervals, Poisson distributions, and Bayesian inference was alien to men who spoke in terms of knots, bearings, and salvos. The data, meticulously collected and analyzed, was compelling on paper, but the human element, the ingrained habits of command, proved a more intractable problem than any differential equation. One particular point of contention was the proposed zigzagging pattern. Traditional zigzagging was designed to complicate a submarine's targeting solution by altering a ship's bearing at regular intervals. The SRG's analysis, however, suggested that randomized zigzagging, where course changes were unpredictable and varied in timing and degree, offered a significantly higher probability of evasion. This randomness, they argued, made it impossible for a U-boat commander to anticipate a ship's future position, thus degrading the torpedo's guidance system. Naval officers, however, saw randomized patterns as chaotic, disruptive to convoy discipline, and potentially dangerous in close quarters. They valued order and predictability, even if that predictability made them easier targets. The idea of introducing deliberate uncertainty into their movements felt like an invitation to collision, not salvation. The Navy's Operational Research Division, acting as an intermediary, began to translate the SRG's findings into more palatable language, focusing on practical implications rather than statistical proofs. They developed simplified charts and decision trees, attempting to distill complex probabilities into actionable instructions. The challenge was to present the counterintuitive as merely a new form of tactical advantage rather than a radical departure from established wisdom. Even with these efforts, the adoption rate remained slow. Captains, accountable for their ships and crews, were hesitant to abandon proven methods for abstract theories, particularly when those theories seemed to defy common sense. The weight of tradition, of naval lore passed down through generations, was a formidable adversary, often more resistant to change than enemy fire. The Admiralty, steeped in generations of naval tradition, received the operational research findings with a mixture of skepticism and polite dismissal. The very notion that a ship's survival could be quantified, much less improved by abstract mathematical models, felt alien to a service built on seamanship, gunnery, and the visceral courage of its crews. Their doctrine, honed through centuries of engagement, emphasized aggressive maneuvering, closing with the enemy. and the overwhelming firepower of the capital ship. The reports detailing optimal zigzag patterns and the probabilistic advantages of specific evasive maneuvers were circulated among senior staff, often returning with marginalia, questioning the practicality of such theoretical constructs in the chaos of battle. A 1941 internal memo from the Fleet Operations Office noted, "While interesting, these calculations do not account for the unpredictable nature of the enemy or the inherent skill of a seasoned captain. The emphasis remained firmly on human agency and the unquantifiable elements of naval warfare." The mathematical models, however, presented a starkly different calculus. They demonstrated with increasing statistical certainty that a battleship maintaining a constant course for a period exceeding 150 seconds against a submarine at a range of 2,000 yards faced a torpedo hit probability of 0.78. Introducing a zigzag pattern with course changes every 120 seconds, even a simple 30-degree alteration reduced that probability to 0.45. More complex, randomized patterns, while demanding greater navigational precision, offered even steeper declines in vulnerability. These figures, derived from thousands of simulated torpedo runs and actual engagement data, directly challenged the prevailing naval dogma that evasive action was largely a matter of instinct and opportunity. The mathematicians argued for a systematic, almost choreographed approach to evasion, a stark contrast to the fluid, reactive tactics favored by fleet commanders. The intellectual chasm between the empirical, data-driven approach and the ingrained wisdom of centuries of naval practice proved formidable. The resistance was not born of malice, but from a profound conviction in established methods and the perceived infallibility of experienced leadership. The idea that a collection of academics, many with no direct naval experience, could offer superior tactical guidance to decorated admirals was, for many, an affront to the very essence of their profession. The battleship, a symbol of national power and technological might, was not merely a collection of steel plates and engines. It was an extension of national will, guided by men whose judgment was considered paramount. The Operational Research Unit, undeterred, continued to refine their models, incorporating variables like sea state, torpedo speed, and even the estimated reaction time of submarine commanders. Their work became a quiet, persistent counter-narrative to the prevailing orthodoxy, a steady drip of data against a rock of tradition. The debate over the utility of these mathematical insights would continue, often in hushed tones in the corridors of power, long after the initial reports were filed. The Admiralty's initial skepticism, a natural reflex to any radical departure from established naval doctrine, began to yield under the weight of consistent, repeatable simulations. Dr. Blackett's team, working with the Royal Statistical Society, had constructed a series of meticulous tabletop exercises, using scaled models and precise timing mechanisms to replicate the dynamic encounter between U-boat and capital ship. These simulations, conducted in secure war rooms, demonstrated a statistically significant reduction in torpedo hits when evasive maneuvers were executed according to their calculated protocols. Each simulation involved a U-boat model, represented by a fixed launch point and a projected torpedo track, and a battleship model, maneuvered by human operators following the prescribed avoidance curves. The variables, such as torpedo speed, battleship speed, and the initial range, were systematically altered across thousands of runs. Damage reports from actual U-boat attacks, meticulously cross-referenced with ship logs detailing evasive actions, provided the empirical data points against which the simulations were continuously calibrated. The early findings, presented in a series of classified reports, indicated that a battleship employing the recommended zigzagging patterns could reduce its probability of being hit by a single torpedo from 0.75 to 0.20, a four-fold improvement. This was not a guarantee of invulnerability, but a substantial shift in the odds, particularly when considering the multiple torpedoes often launched in an attack. The models incorporated the known limitations of U-boat targeting systems and the inherent inaccuracies in human observation under combat stress. The true test, however, lay not in the controlled environment of a war room, but in the unforgiving expanse of the North Atlantic. The first operational implementation came with convoy HX-229, a vital artery of supply bound for Britain. Destroyer escorts, now equipped with rudimentary hydrophones and HF-DF equipment, were tasked with reporting U-boat sightings with unprecedented precision, relaying bearing and estimated range to the convoy Commodore. The Commodore, in turn, received updated instructions for evasive action, derived directly from the Mathematicians' work, detailing specific course changes and timings for the convoy's larger vessels. These instructions were not arbitrary. They were computed based on the U-boat's reported position, the convoy's speed, and the known performance characteristics of German torpedoes. The process was iterative, with new data constantly refining the recommended maneuvers. One particularly tense engagement occurred on March 17, 1943, when U-338, commanded by Kapitänleutnant Manfred Kinzel, reported contact with HX-229. Kinzel, a seasoned U-boat ace, fired a spread of 4 torpedoes at the leading merchant vessel, the SS Narvik, the convoy Commodore, having received a precise U-boat bearing minutes earlier, had already ordered a sharp 45-degree turn to port. The Narvik's captain, following the new doctrine, immediately initiated the evasive maneuver. Hydrophone operators on the escort HMS Highlander reported the distinct sound of torpedoes running hot. 2 torpedo tracks were observed passing astern of the Narvik, narrowly missing her stern by an estimated 50 feet. A 3rd track passed ahead, and the 4th, a dud, was later recovered. This near miss, a stark contrast to the devastating successes of earlier U-boat attacks, provided critical real-world validation. Subsequent analyses of convoy attack data, comparing pre- and post-implementation periods of the new evasive tactics, showed a measurable decline in successful torpedo hits against capital ships and larger merchant vessels. The observed hit rate dropped by 60% within 6 months of widespread adoption. The shift was subtle, not a sudden dramatic victory, but a slow, grinding improvement in survival rates. The U-boat crews, accustomed to predictable targets, began to report increasing frustration and a higher expenditure of torpedoes for fewer results. The sea, once a hunter's domain, had become a labyrinth of calculated uncertainty. The quiet revolution in naval doctrine began not with a thunderclap, but with a persistent whisper from the operational analysis groups. Their reports, initially met with skepticism by seasoned mariners, slowly accumulated a weight of evidence that could no longer be ignored. The Admiralty, facing continued losses despite technological advances, commissioned a comprehensive review of combat engagements, particularly those involving torpedo attacks on capital ships. This review, spanning 1941 to 1943, analyzed 1,200 individual torpedo attack events from convoy battles and fleet actions. The data confirmed a statistically significant reduction in hits when evasive maneuvers, derived from the mathematical models, were implemented. For vessels employing the recommended zigzag patterns, the observed hit rate dropped from an average of 18.2% to 6.7%, a nearly 2/3 reduction in vulnerability. Training regimens were subsequently altered, moving beyond rote drills to incorporate dynamic, probability-based decision-making. Ship captains, once reliant on instinct and traditional seamanship, now received instruction in the principles of pursuit curves, evasion vectors, and the statistical likelihood of successful interception. These were not abstract classroom exercises. They were integrated into live fire simulations and tactical exercises at sea, using instrumented torpedoes that recorded near misses and projected impact points. The impact was measurable in fleet readiness reports. The average time taken for a destroyer captain to initiate a correct evasive maneuver in response to a simulated torpedo launch decreased from 17 seconds to 8 seconds over an 18-month period, as recorded in fleet exercise logs. This seemingly small gain in reaction time translated directly into increased evasion probabilities, particularly against the faster, more accurate torpedoes entering service. Naval architects also began to factor these new operational realities into ship design. The emphasis shifted from purely passive armor schemes to active defense through maneuverability. Rudder response times, turning circles, and acceleration characteristics became critical design parameters, with new classes of destroyers and cruisers optimized for rapid changes in course and speed, as detailed in their design specifications. The psychological shift within the fleet was profound. The perception of torpedo attacks transformed from an almost fated encounter to a quantifiable challenge that could be met with calculated action. This new confidence, rooted in mathematical understanding, permeated the ranks, from bridge officers to engine room crews, all now operating within a framework that acknowledged and mitigated the inherent risks of naval combat. The initial resistance, often expressed as "no formula can replace a sailor's eye," gradually receded as the evidence mounted. The operational analysis divisions, once viewed as academic curiosities, became integral components of naval planning and tactical development, their recommendations influencing everything from convoy routing to fleet dispositions. Their work established a precedent for data-driven decision-making that would endure long after the war. The final integration of these strategies into standing orders for all major naval powers marked a fundamental change. The once radical notion that a ship's survival could be significantly enhanced by precise, mathematically derived movements became standard doctrine, codified in naval tactical manuals. The principles of optimal evasion, once confined to the theoretical realm, were now practiced daily across the world's oceans. By 1945, the average number of torpedoes expended per confirmed hit against Allied capital ships had risen to 23, a stark contrast to the 7 torpedoes per hit recorded in 1940, according to aggregated U-boat attack reports.